Hey, this is Shay Styles, where we bring our creativity to life. So here's a visual of what I want the bodycon dress to look like. So it'll come down low, just to show some cleavage. It'll be spaghetti strap. It's a bodycon dress. We want a little dip here at the knee, and we're gonna add an extension here. And then the back, it's just simple. So I just like to write notes, identify what's the front and the back, say what type of fabric I'm going to use. And sometimes I even like to put my measurements. In this case, I put a lot of my measurements and note taking on the back of the image that I drew. And this is the fabric that I intend to use to make the dress. Create a straight horizontal and vertical line. The horizontal line up at the top is going to be your high shoulder point. You're going to measure your shoulder to shoulder measurement. Mine is 12.5. Divide that number by 2, and that's your shoulder measurement. Mine is 6 2/8. Make a mark for your shoulder measurement at the top. Next is your bust measurement. Measure from your shoulders down to the fullest part of your breast. Mine is 10 inches. Next is the upper bust, which is the area where the bust starts to curve. Measure from your shoulder to the upper bust area. My measurement is 7 inches. Now let's measure the waist. Bend to your right. The space that's in that bend is your waist. Measure from your shoulder to your waist. My measurement is 16.5 inches. Let's take our hip measurement. Measure the fullest part of your butt. That's your hip measurement. Measure from your shoulder to that point. Mine is 22 inches. Now let's take your knee measurement. Measure from your shoulder all the way to your knee. My measurement is 37 inches. From my knee to my my knee, my waist, this should be hip, waist, bust, my upper bust, and my high shoulder point. Now let's plot our circumferences. We're going to start off with our bust circumference first. All of our measurements are going to be divided by 4 because we're working with either the front right, the front left, the back right, or the back left. I want to show you how I plan to adjust my measurements because this stretches. So we need to add negative ease into this. So this is the selvage edge of the fabric here, and I need to measure the stretch part. It's a 4-way stretch, so it stretches this way, and it stretches this way a little bit, but it has way more stretch this way than it does this way. And so this part is going to be wrapping around my body because the grain line is always going to be perpendicular to the selvage edge. So I need to know how much is this going to stretch so that I can take account to that in my pattern. What I typically do is I take the fabric loosely, and at the 1 inch mark, which is here, I pinch it and I hold the fabric down on the other side, and then I stretch it to see how far it stretches. And so I started here and I stretched it, and it's about 1 inch. So I'm going to take 1 inch off of my pattern, and that should make up for the stretch so that it fits well. All right, so let's do that. So for the bust measurement, measure around your back to the fullest part of your bust, divide that number by 4 and subtract 1. My measurement is 7 1/8 of an inch. For your waist circumference, bend to the right, measure the circumference at that bend, divide your number by 4, subtract 1. My measurement is 6 inches. Sorry that you can't see it. And I wrote waist twice. It should say waist then hip. For your hip circumference, measure around the fullest part of your hip, divide by 4, subtract 1. My measurement is 8 inches. That should say hip, not waist. You don't have 2 waists. The knee measurement is going to help accentuate your shape. So take 1 inch off of your hip measurement. Mine would be 7 inches. Mark it down and then connect all of your points. Now we get up to the upper bust, and one other thing that I like to do is just even out the curve, smooth out the lines. So because our bodies are curved, so we want to make sure we smooth out those lines as well. And our pattern. Okay. All right. So what we want to do now, let's design where the straps will go. Make a vertical line 2.5 inches away from your shoulder to shoulder measurement that extends to your bust line. Measure your underarm circumference and divide that number by 2. Mine is 8 inches. Mark your measurement in alignment with your shoulder to shoulder measurement and extending from your high shoulder point. To identify where the strap will meet the neckline of the dress, make a mark 1 inch above the upper bust line on your vertical line that is 2.5 inches away from your shoulder to shoulder measurement. Measure 1/2 inch inward from that mark. This is the width of your strap. Now let's connect the points we have at the top of the dress. Connect the outer strap mark to the underarm mark. Connect the underarm mark to the side seam of the dress. Now let's create the neckline of the dress. This measurement will depend on how much cleavage you want to be exposed. I created a mark at the center front of the pattern 1 inch away from my upper bust line. Connect the points from the strap to that mark using your French curve. Now I'm just going to outline my entire pattern in a dark black marker so you guys can see everything clearly. My next step before labeling the pattern piece is adding my seam allowance. My seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch. All right, once we do that, now we want to mark off our grain line. Grain line is going to be parallel to the selvage edge. So I just want to make sure that this is straight. So I'm just going to write here. And this is my grain line. And I know that it's going to stretch. So I just write stretch here. And then over on the side here, I just need it to say that it's on the fold. All right, we're gonna cut this on the fold, and we are doing cut 1 on the fold. All right, and then one thing I like to do, because I just forget, I just like to write what my seam allowance is so I don't forget. All right, and you cut out your pattern piece, and then we move on to the next step. Let's get into the design of the back of the dress. Create the same horizontal lines and mark your high shoulder point, upper bust, waist, hip, and knee. We're going to use the numbers from our front pattern piece on the back pattern piece. Mark the measurement for your shoulder to shoulder measurement. Record your bust measurement from the front pattern piece. Record your waist measurement from the front pattern piece. Record your hip measurement from the front pattern piece. Lastly, record your knee measurement from the front pattern piece and connect all your points. Now we're at the top, and we're going to focus on this upper bust line. Now let's create the top of the back of the dress. The steps are similar in how we created the front neckline of the dress. Take your underarm circumference measurement divided by 2 and make a mark that is in alignment with your shoulder to shoulder measurement extending from your high shoulder point. Connect this point with your bust line point. I want my dress to have a slightly curved line instead of a straight line. To achieve this, I will make a mark at the center front 1 inch below the underarm mark. Use your French curve to connect the points. Now let's create our marks to show where our straps will be placed at the back of the dress. Make a mark on your curved line that is 2.5 inches away from your shoulder to shoulder measurement. Make another mark 1/2 inch inward from that mark. Add your seam allowance around the entire edge of the pattern. In my case, my seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch. And then darken your pattern with a marker. Now let's label this back pattern piece. is going to be on the fold, right? And then we want our grain line. I'll use my ruler to make it straight because we want it to be straight, because it's supposed to be parallel with the selvage edge. So grain line goes this way, and then we want our stretch to go that way. And then one thing that I like to do is write down the seam allowances so I don't forget. So put 3/8 there, 3/8 up at the top, 3/8 down at the bottom. Now let's create the pattern for the front and back lining of the dress. Starting with the front lining, we want to trace the upper portion of the pattern. We want our lining to extend approximately 1 inch under our underbust. For me, the measurement is 3.5 inches under my bust line. Trace the outer edge of the pattern up to the bust line. Extend the measurement downwards 3.5 inches on both sides of the pattern. Connect the lines. And then I'm going to add seam allowance just at the bottom, because I've already added the seam allowance for all the other parts. And then I'm going to cut out this pattern piece, and we're going to do the same thing for the back piece. All right, so I added my seam allowance. For me, I did 3/8 of an inch of a seam allowance here down at the bottom. And I just need to label this. This is my lining. I need, this line isn't straight, which it should be, but this is my grain line. I know this is my stretch, and I'm cutting this on the fold. So on fold, and I'm cutting one piece, and this is my front lining. Okay. All right. Now let's do the same thing for the back. We're going to follow the same technique to complete the back lining pattern. Trace the upper portion of the back pattern piece up until the bust line on both sides. Extend your line approximately 1 inch under your underbust. For me, the measurement is 3.5 inches under my bust line. Connect the lines. Add your seam allowance to the bottom of the pattern only. All right, so here's my seam allowance here. This is also going to be cut on the fold. So on fold, this is my back lining. I'm only gonna cut one of this too. This is also going to be my grain line. And this way it's stretching. Now let's get into cutting the fabric to create our straps. You can create a pattern for this if you'd like. I didn't. I just wrote notes on the length of the straps for future use with this pattern. Start by measuring the length from the front of the dress at the 1/2 width at the neckline to your high shoulder point. Then from high shoulder point to the 1/2 inch markings on the back neckline of the dress. My measurements are 5 inches for the front and 11 inches for the back, making the straps a total length of 16 inches. The strap will be a 1/2 inch in width. So we want our fabric for each strap to be 1 inch. This includes seam allowance. Lastly, let's include our seam allowance at the ends of each strap lengthwise. So add an additional 6/8 of an inch to your measurement, 3/8 of an inch for each end. My length measurement with seam allowance will be 16 6/8 of an inch. I'm gonna add some interfacing in the strap so it doesn't stretch as much. And so I want to show you, this is the knit interfacing that I got. And I want to show you that this interfacing stretches. So it doesn't stretch that much this way, but if you pull it this way, You see how much it stretches. We are going to cut the interfacing this way because we don't want the strap to stretch as much. And this is a fusible knit interface. Interfacing provides stability for the garment. In our case, we don't want the straps to stretch too much. It is a knit interface, so it will be able to move slightly with the knit fabric. And we can iron this interfacing on for an easier install. Cut your interfacing the length of your strap by 1/2 inch, which is the width of the strap. Okay, so we are going to create a little variation. We're going to change up some variation of the front a little bit. We're going to do a little cutout. So first thing I need to do is I need to use a pin just to mark off where the center front is. And then I'm going to open it up. So this is how the dress is essentially going to look. And here is the center front. And now what I want to do is I want to create a cutout. So this is the center front, and I want it to maybe go up about, let's see, 2 inches. So 2 inches is about here. We can do a curve up, and I want to measure off halfway in between here. So it's about 7 1/8. So a half is about 3 3/8. Have our 2 inches, which is here. I don't know if you can see that. And then here is our cutout. We can even do this on the reverse side. So you can see it a little better. So we have our 2 inches up here, and we want about halfway between here and here. So that's probably around here. So we want a curve. All right, and that's all the adjustments that we are gonna make on the front. Now let's get to sewing. The directions to add the ruffle skirt to the bottom of this dress will be added in the sewing tutorial for this video. Thanks for watching.